In terms of capacity development, I'm going to talk a little bit around what capacity development it is, what forms it takes, talk about why it's needed, although I'm expecting that you all realize why it's needed. We'll talk also about who initiates this capacity development. There's a few case study examples from different countries and regions, and then we'll finish off with some useful links and insights and resources that you should take a look into if you have any further questions. One other point which we'll cover as well is that the capacity development, I really hope that you see that even presenting these insights is that there's a certain amount of communication and marketing being done in all of these. It might be very open, very directly stated as marketing, but it's also a lot of guerrilla marketing, secondary marketing. So I like to play pictograms with family, and this is a good one. So we'll see if anybody can work out what this is. Absolutely, yes. Believe it's from a Chinese proverb, but that may be wrong, is that you give somebody a fish, you feed them for the day, teach them how to fish, you feed them for life. And that essentially is around the capacity development. And that's one of the messages we want to put. It's not just be given something. Of course, you'll be grateful for it, but if you don't fully know how to do it, or you haven't developed the capacity to do it yourself, then it's not as effective. So capacity, it's assistance, it's help. It can be formal help, informal help, and it can involve or comprise of many different things. We often say that it is around resources, and those resources can be human resources, people actually there to do a job. It can be financial resources, money, funds to do things, to buy things. It can be equipment. It can be expertise. So you might not actually get a new resource, but somebody might promise to give you some of their skills and their capability. It could even be data. Data is also a capacity that many countries are wanting to develop. It can also be policy, and this is getting into a heavy legal part, but if you can get a policy written that stipulates or mandates the use of data to a certain precision or to a certain standard, that is a very important capacity. And it can also be time. I think everybody here will say that they don't have enough time to do what they want to do, both in work and in private lives. So time is a really important factor as well. It's also worth just saying, why is it needed? And it's typically because an organization doesn't possess enough of those resources above to be able to do it by themselves. And that's where we also hear about this term lack of capacity. It's also needed because groups and teams, they want to learn, they want to network, they want to improve their skills, and they also want to collaborate. So you may think this sounds like a lot of words, but it is a lot of words because it means a lot of different things. It can come in many shapes and forms. How and who starts capacity development? Well, we're all here on a capacity development workshop. Everybody signed up to that. Many people were invited. And in this particular one, you might say, well, it was the UN-GGCE invited us to attend. Well, they did at that particular step, but that invitation was actually based on the feedback that you gave to the center through the listening tours the year before, where the center was approaching you from different regions, different organizations, asking, what do you need? What capacities do you need to develop? So it was actually the center asking for your feedback that helped to generate this capacity development activity. I talk here about push and pull. Those that have the spare capacity or the ability, they can offer their capacity to the community. So that's we call the push. If an organization really needs help with something, they can advertise, hey, I need that help. We call that pull. But either way, both of these are working. Capacity development is also known in other terms as knowledge transfer, as CapDev or CD. It's also called education, training, and capacity building. And indeed, that was a term that was used within the UN-GGCE up till a few years ago as that main means of sharing information and training. It's also known as outreach and engagement. So there's many different terms to talk around this, but essentially it's the two-way transfer of knowledge, skills, needs, understanding, and working together. It's also worth mentioning that capacity development is not from your organization out to another government agency or to another nation or to another country. There can also be what we class as in-reach, where you are helping to build capacity within your own organization or team. Mentoring is a very good example of capacity development as well. We've heard a lot also about the Geodesy crisis. Well, this has magnified the need for capacity development. But is that Geodesy crisis through the lack of geodesists? Some organizations, some universities will say, yes, we're not getting the intake, so we're not able to generate new geodesists and graduate surveyors going out. But also lack of resources is one of the challenges that contribute to a Geodesy crisis. Lack of funding. I think most departments will say we're not getting as much funding because of various reasons. Lack of support, lack of understanding. This is also one of the big challenges that we see in Geodesy. I think all of you will have been involved in putting in bids or requests or proposal to get additional funding for Geodesy, whether it's more cores, whether it's tide gauges, whether it's to do some more data processing. And if your management and your senior managers and ministers don't understand what you're doing, it's challenging for them to give you the support. Is it lack of interest? Might be. We don't have enough AI in Geodesy, and therefore it's not that interesting for younger people. So I would say that the Geodesy crisis, yes, we have that, but it's many of those, it's all of those factors and even more. I'm going to change tack a little bit and talk around some of the organizations that we are aware of who provide capacity. They support capacity development. There are institutions and agencies around the world, including the UN and, of course, the UN-GGCE, who are providing and offer capacity development. There's the World Bank Group, definitely in terms of providing funding, not necessarily resources, but funding for that. Development banks also are typically helping to provide funding as part of a capacity development. Academic community is also very strong in helping to train and educate people, whether they're geodesists and surveyors, to increase their knowledge and understanding, learn new technologies, or whether it's actually bringing them into the surveying world. There are also corporates, companies who have funding, contributions. There are foundations as well, and we'll cover a few of those, but the Gates Foundation is one. I know, Gabby, you also know a foundation.
The Obama Foundation.
So again, another type of organization that is helping to provide funding to build capacity and understanding. And there's also a community of surveying, geospatial science associations around the world. And a few of those abbreviations you'll learn a little bit more about in the next presentation. Hopefully this doesn't shock you, some of these names. You'll be familiar with what some of these names are. And this will be very relevant in the business case session on Thursday. But when you talk about that capacity development, it isn't just a check or a transfer of funds. It can mean a lot of other things. Just before we gave the first workshop in Europe earlier on this year, there was this announcement, the US Aid organization, and that was a very large contributor of funds for international development activities, especially in developing countries. And that organization and its funding was suspended in January this year. And that is also a fact that has triggered quite a lot of repercussions, especially in other development agencies from other countries who were not the biggest donor. US aid was probably the biggest donor. But now that that has changed, of course, that is a huge amount of money. I think it was, well, yes, $72 billion in the fiscal year 2023 of funding essentially is no longer going into the development pool. That's significant. And all of the other countries and developed groups are also reviewing whether they want to still keep that going. So I don't want to be too negative here, but it identifies an opportunity. It's the opportunity where to get Geodesy funding and development, you need to work even harder to craft and communicate the message of what Geodesy needs, how Geodesy can benefit. And that also helps to lead us into the business case and the communication sessions later on. If you can't communicate, or if you don't know what you want help with and can't communicate that, you will not get that help. The next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about some case studies, and they're going to provide, hopefully for you, evidence that capacity development does work. Hopefully you're already seeing that from this workshop and the first day and a half. We hope that it will help to motivate you that the capacity development requests can be made. It'll take a little bit of time to start it up and to prepare it, but hopefully it will also inspire you as to who you potentially could reach out to with a well-crafted request. Some of these case studies, they're not all exclusively Geodesy, but they all have a need or a use or have benefited from Geodesy in some shape or form. They're all around geospatial, and hopefully they will help to inspire you with some of your business case ideas that will come later on. This is one here just talking around spatial data digitization in Kenya. And we noted this from January this year is that developing nations like Kenya, of course, they are very strongly driven by land administration, cadastral surveys that really manage both private people's property and also companies and organizations within a nation. But for that to be successful, of course, all of those land packages and parcels, they have to be legally recorded. And the fact that if you're doing this without a correct geodetic reference behind all of those land packages, it's going to be extremely difficult to maintain the security of that land over time. So even for Kenya, they were finding that that spatial element was one of the most important, the geospatial referencing in there. We also had an example from Eva and her colleagues at Cadastre in Netherlands around land administration in Chad. And one of the challenges that we have, we've all been talking around very nice digital technologies and so on, but the reality on the ground is that boundaries, as an example here, are not those tires and pillars, they're actually smaller marks in the ground. And it's that thing, it's that accuracy and precision is very important to us in a classroom, but out in the real world on the ground, it's that reality. How is that then related to surveying? I have a couple of slides here also, which are just talking about different land administration models. This one is the social tenure domain model, and it's definitely not anything that us geodesists are familiar with or aware of. But I did want to include these couple of slides because it showed that this is a very important model and procedure with the parties, the individuals and organizations, their relationship and the legal aspects. But there's that spatial element in there that is almost the glue that adds all of these together. So you can have ownership, you can have the legal framework and traceability around it, but unless you know what it is and where it is, it's very hard for this to actually work. It's impossible for it to work, in fact. There are also a number of frameworks that have been initiated, this one by the UN-GGCE, and that's the Framework for Effective Land Administration. And I'm not going to talk a lot about this at all. I'm sure that someone like Victor can share a lot more detailed information around this, and you can maybe ask him at the next coffee breaks tomorrow. But this also identifies that these frameworks are being used in many developing countries, and that spatial element is core to this working successfully. It spans that link between the governance, the people, and the technology. And ultimately, as Nick was showing in the presentations yesterday, that geodetic reference frame, that underlying positioning component, that spatial layer at the very bottom, is key to making everything above it be safe and secure. If you don't have that geodetic frame at the bottom, correct and traceable, especially traceable when we hear about some of the challenges with the hearing about legacy datums, everything that's built on it is going to be weak. I also wanted to share just a little bit from our colleagues in Sweden, Lantmäteriet, where this is the national mapping agency for Sweden, but they also have a very strong history of working in international projects as part of their capacity development and outreach activities. And this was a graphic that was presented by Chris Byron at the Kenya workshop last month, but it just shows where different countries are working together for the benefit of developing countries to help provide and build their capacity. Some of the examples in here are in Africa, but also Europe. And all of these in here, you see them, they're nothing to do with Geodesy from their names. But the Lantmäteriet division is responsible for Geodesy and surveying and cadastre in Sweden. But some of its expertise is most successfully provided out by being able to relate Geodesy to land parcels. So there is already, as you see there, a number of active projects. So this is working, where countries that have developed geodesy and cadastral systems are sharing their knowledge and experience to developing nations to help fast track them to be able to build that for themselves. I also had a couple of slides in here that went down very well at the Europe and Africa workshops, but I'm not going to steal the thunder from Andrik and Vaipo and his colleagues. So I'm just going to touch on this very, very, very briefly, is to talk around, again, some capacity that has been built up within regions, in this case, the Pacific islands and communities, to best come together and collaborate and leverage their needs, their requests, but also their capabilities across the different nations. And this type of partnership here is extremely important, but also extremely successful in being able to, one, gather the needs from within that region and understand it, and then also to be able to communicate what capacity is required to fulfill those needs. And we'll definitely hear more from Andrik and Vaipo over the coming days. There's a couple of parts in here which I can touch on very quickly, is that these partnerships, these councils, for example, they provide several roles, and there is roles in there about advocacy and awareness and supporting development goals and partnerships. But the main takeaway here is that there are clear technical needs around positioning geodesy across that region, and the partnership has the capability to help fulfill those needs, whether it's by having equipment pools, whether it's educating and training people around data standards, data processing, the advocacy and awareness. The voice of one nation is very small, but when you have 10 or 12 or 14 nations all raising the same concerns, then the voice is magnified. And that's an extremely important factor around the advocacy. Communications and community, this is where I want to touch on. All of these activities are being done as part of their normal operations, but they're ensuring that they're recorded, that they're on social media and on websites to demonstrate visibly that capacity development is active, is working, is delivering outcomes as well. So that communication and marketing point that I was talking around, that's also extremely critical to show to the outside world, to other government departments, to the media, to the public in your region, that things are happening around geospatial, around Geodesy, and the improvements that it brings. So that particular communications and marketing is not technical from a Geodesy point of view, but it's extremely important in demonstrating that technology is working behind these sciences and activities. I'll just jump over there, but the activities is another part of that outreach and engagement, where the groups are getting together and talking about their challenges, talking about their wins, and also raising their needs and requests to the greater community. Again, that's part of capacity development. If you don't ask for assistance in certain activities, you will never get it. Now to just move on to some other regional networks, because we found that that's also very important. Even though this is not specifically the Asia Pacific region, there are many lessons to be learned from what other regions are doing in terms of building capacity and collaboration. The UN-GGCE Africa's region has a number of working groups. You've heard already today from Basara about UN-GGCE Asia Pacific. Well, the Americas group also does similar activities that involve, as you see there in bold in the middle, Geodesy. But they have a number of working groups which have been designed and created to reflect some of the challenges of the time: land administration, geospatial frameworks, disasters. So these are all groups working together to help improve access to geospatial services and capabilities in light of those challenges. Technical guidelines and recommendations. Nick presented this already yesterday, but again, a simple guideline document around reference stations, or how to install a reference station, how to process data, how to select a station, are very useful and should be shared. That's one of the first things that if anybody is building a new core station, they want to go and see what people have done before. What are the latest guidelines? What are the recommendations? And they're already very powerful capacity resources that can be shared. Training activities. Well, you're here at this training workshop, so I think you do realize that face-to-face meetings also are extremely effective. And it's not just the presentations and the slides, but it's also the discussions over coffee and lunch, or over Thai barbecue as well. It's very important. So I'll jump over these. Another important factor as well that we was really highlighted to Nick and I after hosting the workshop in Africa recently, where the course or the workshop was presented in English and in French, was a simple thing: that translation, language translation, document translation. Not having that can really close off quite a large community. So something as simple as making materials available in different languages, whether it's documents, guidelines, webinars, can really help to open up how far and how deeply information can go. Again, it's a very easy capacity development activity. There are also a number of different organizations, and I'll talk about FIG, the International Federation of Surveyors, in more detail later on. But what I'd like to share here very quickly is around their informal networks that have been developed as well. FIG being representative of surveyors and geodesists of all shapes and flavors and colors. They have 3 regional networks. They have the Americas network, the Africa regional network, and also the Asia Pacific capacity development network. And there's actually a few people in here who are very well involved in this. I'm looking at Andrik and Basara, especially, and hopefully they can add some comments later around this, but also around Young Surveyors Network. That's also one part of the surveying community that has to be developed. We definitely have to sustain that for the future of Geodesy as well. So there are lots of different groups out there who have that capability, who are willing, and also are looking for new members to come and join and for others to come in and contribute where they can to building up capacity. One very good example, which I hope you can look at later on in the FIG community, is around the Volunteer Community Surveyor Program. This is definitely not only Geodesy, it's also land surveying, hydrographic surveying, and so on. But it's a well-organized international group who are working together to either share deployment, training, knowledge transfer around this. And that's a very important part, an important group to look after. I mentioned also around the FIG Asia Pacific Capacity Development Network, and this is a group that's been well established also for probably more years than we care to comment on, Andrik. But it's a very successful entity which is running through different groups. It collaborates between different professional and scientific organizations. Some of them are global, like FIG, but some of them are regional, like ASEAN Flag, PGSC, Geoscience Australia, LINS, amongst others. But they also bring together the academic and educational communities as well. And also then it has a tie-in with international agencies such as UN-GGCE, UN-USA, and so on. One of the things which you need to understand around capacity development is that there is no one guideline. There is no one recipe that will fit every region, every demand, every organization. But there are lots of very good examples of recipes that other groups have found to work. So there's a lot of good use studies to be taken. There's also a lot of documentation that's out there that can be used and should be considered, such as the contribution of surveyors to disaster risk management. Again, these are very good documents that can be used from an operational point of view, but also to demonstrate references that this is an important part of a nation's disaster management ecosystem. Climate change also is something that we have to do together. No one nation can do this alone. And this is also one where surveyors across the world can help to contribute to minimizing the effects of climate change. I think this is especially relevant when we think around the increased risk that the Asia Pacific community has around the effect of climate change, extreme weather patterns, as well as rising sea levels and so on. Collaboration is definitely the key part. Working together with organizations, they may not have all of the resources, they may not have the personnel, but they may have the network, the contact. They may be able to open up or to share the needs of some groups with a larger community. So it really is worthwhile working together. It's also one of the reasons why we really hope that as an alumni of this event that you will communicate and share your success stories, your needs, your calls for help. Can you help us? Once this workshop is finished and into the future. So these last couple of slides before I open the floor for questions is this capacity development. One of the most important things is that you are able to communicate your needs for capacity, the skills that you can offer, and the benefits that Geodesy can provide before you start going out and asking for that support. You need to craft your message, your needs, your offer. And that can be in any one of those categories that I've mentioned there, but you need to to be quite clear about what you're looking for, what you're offering. Some of the terms to include would be a request, the purpose, partners who you can call upon already or you would like to have, the benefits that will come from working together, from developing that capacity. It's also very important to be able to answer the why. Why do you need this? Why are you offering that? Why do you ask for this? And also to think around what is the risk if it's not provided. That's also a very powerful part, and also can be a good motivator to get someone to provide you assistance. And cost. But one of the things here that we really want for you to understand is that the UN-GGCE is also here offering that capability. We're here also offering to help listen to your request, or to craft your request, or to even understand what you need and put you in contact with somebody that we might know who can offer that. So communication and collaboration is really key for this. This slide here just shows some of the organizations that many of us have been involved with that we know, either as an international body, provide capacity or have offered capacity. They can be organizations and associations, but there are many, many, many more groups out there. So this is also where it's very good that you can share your experiences across the greater group and with the center, so we can add more names to this for future workshops and seminars. One of the main takeaways, as well as talking around crafting your message, is actually to say assistance is always available. You just have to ask. And asking for assistance is not a weakness. Most definitely not a weakness. So reach out, participate, and collaborate wherever you can.